Exercise 5 is the integumentary system. This is going to be dealing with the skin, which is its own system. The integument, it is the skin itself is the largest organ in the body. The skin is divided into different layers: the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. This is moving superficial to deep. So when we look at the various layers here, which we will talk about, you will notice over here the epidermis layer. This is the most superficial epidermis. It is composed of epithelial tissue, and yes, you will notice that obviously with the skin, the outer surface is exposed. It doesn't have anything else attached to it. Beneath the epidermis is the dermal layer, and then the hypodermis, sometimes called the subcutaneous layer. This technically is not part of the integument or the layers of the skin, but it's always included with it because it's not really attached to anything else. And so it's one of those weird things where we say, okay, it's not a part of the epidermis, but we're always going to place it here and study it with it. You'll notice there are several other structures here along with the skin, such as right here, we have the sebaceous gland. That is an oil gland. Notice that it is attached always to the hair follicle, which is right here. That is different from right where we have what was known as an eccrine sweat gland. That's a sweat gland. You're going to be sweating mostly. It's mostly water. There's other substances. That will always have an opening directly to the surface of the skin. So we look at the epidermis. That is the most superficial layer. It is composed of stratified squamous epithelium. So remember, stratified means multi-layered. Squamous, they're flattened. Keratinized, this is a protein keratin that is found that helps for waterproofing. We'll talk about it in just a second. Most areas of the skin will have 4 layers. There are 2 areas, the soles of the feet and palms of the hand, that are known as thick skin because it has 5 layers. The epidermis is avascular. Now, the epidermis can be subdivided into 5 different layers or 4 different layers depending on where you are. Like I said, where you're dealing with the palms of the hand or the soles of the feet, which have an extra layer because they get a lot of wear and tear. It's for extra protection. So the layers, starting with the deepest layer, is the stratum basal, the stratum spinosum, then the stratum granulosum, the stratum lucidum. This is the one that's only found in the thick skin. And then the outermost layer, what you actually see is the stratum corneum. And so this is a drawing showing these different layers. And you may notice that the stratum corneum, this outermost layer, this is what you actually see when you're looking at yourself or others. That's actually what you see is dead skin. The actively growing cells are down at the basal layer, the stratum basal, and that's where the cells are actively going through mitosis. As they go through mitosis right down here, those cells, one remains and one new cell gets pushed up, and it's gradually getting pushed up. Now, because the epidermis, which is from this point up, all this is the epidermis, there is no blood supply here. So as you move further away from where the cells originate down here, you're getting farther away from blood supply. So you're not getting nutrients, you're not getting oxygen. The cells are eventually going to die, which is what is happening up here. And certainly by the time you get here on the surface, those cells are dead, and the dead cells are sloughing off. As you can see here, they break off and they slough off. That's fine, because that actually helps with protecting you. That is something, let's say a bacteria were to land on the surface right here, and then the cell sloughs off. Look, there it goes, takes it with it. So the stratum basal, that's the deepest layer, as I just said. The basal cell is a stem cell, which just means it hasn't specialized yet. It's going to go through mitosis very quickly. One cell remains behind, the other one gets pushed up. There are Merkel cells here. These are special receptor for picking up different senses. You also have melanocytes here. This produces a pigment called melanin. That's what helps to give skin color. Part of this is going to be determined genetically as to how much melanin you are producing. Um, I am very fair-skinned, Irish background, and so I'm fair-skinned with a lot of freckles. So basically, my cells don't make a whole lot of melanin because I'm so fair-skinned. The stratum spinosum means spiny. You have 8 to 10 layers of keratinocytes here. You also have types of cells that are called dendritic cells. The older name is Langerhans cells. These are phagocytes, meaning they're basically on the lookout for anything foreign, and they will engulf, a phagocyte will engulf foreign material, damaged cells, and it's protection and cleanup crew. The stratum granulosum, here these look grainy, that's how it gets its name. It's about 3 to 5 layers thick. This is where the cells start dying. That keratin protein is present. That helps, as I said earlier, it gives some waterproofing properties to the skin. That stratum lucidum, that is present only in thick skin. It's very smooth, it's translucent. Like I said, it helps to give extra protection. And then the stratum corneum is the most superficial layer. As I said earlier, it is layers of dead cells. Actually, for protection, it helps to prevent you from getting dehydrated. It's multiple layers thick, anywhere from 15 to 30 layers thick. The dermis, which is found beneath the epidermis, is vascular. This contains connective tissue, and it's divided into 2 layers, the papillary layer and the reticular layer. Because it is vascular, not that this necessarily is a huge thing, but just FYI, we've all gotten paper cuts. So let's say you get a paper cut. You know how sometimes it bleeds and sometimes it doesn't? I don't know if you've ever wondered, oh, why is it not bleeding? Not that you want it to, but if, let's say you get a paper cut and it bleeds, that's telling you that that cut has extended through the epidermis down to the dermis. How do you know that? Because the dermis is vascular. It's got a blood supply. So if it's bleeding, you hit down to that. If it does not bleed, that means that you only cut through the epidermis. You didn't reach the dermis, so it's not as deep. Now, there's lots of nerves in the epidermis. It doesn't have blood supply, but it sure has a lot of nerves. So you're going to know and feel that you cut, but it's not going to bleed. So if it doesn't bleed, it's epidermis. If it does bleed, you cut all the way down to the dermis. And because these cells are growing quickly, it's going to repair itself fairly quickly. So the papillary layer, this is comprised, it's connective tissue. It's specifically loose areolar connective tissue. It does contain some fibroblasts, adipocytes. Adipocytes are fat cells. It has the blood vessels, as I mentioned, phagocytes, which are cells that will engulf any damaged or foreign materials. It contains lymphatic capillaries. Nerves are here. So there's quite a high variety of different types of cells there. The reticular layer, which is deeper, is dense, irregular connective tissue. Once again, it's highly vascular and it's highly innervated. Innervated meaning it has lots of nerves in it. The papillary, when we talk about the papillary layer, it has what we call dermal papillae. Dermal papillae are these, see, you've got these, they look like ridges. That's going to help actually with the formation of your fingerprints. The hypodermis, this, as I said, is sometimes called the subcutaneous layer or the superficial fascia. It has a lot of blood vessels to it. has loose areolar connective tissue. It has a lot of adipose or fat tissue. It helps with cushioning. It helps with insulation. As I mentioned earlier, technically it's not part of the integument, but it's always studied with it. With the integumentary system, we have a lot of accessory structures such as hair, nails, sweat glands, and sebaceous glands. So with the hair, this is actually what you're seeing once again is dead cells. So I hate to break it to you, but a lot of what you see is dead. The hair shaft, that's the portion that you see that's above the surface of the skin. Below the surface of the skin is the hair root. Now, at the very bottom of the root, the deepest layer is what we call the papillae. That has connective tissue, has the blood vessels there, it has nerves there, so the cells around that are very actively growing. And then that papillae is surrounded by the hair bulb. And then where that hair bulb is, you've got the hair follicles is also a sac that's surrounding the hair. The hair matrix, this is where you have basal cells that are going through mitosis once again. One cell stays down, it pushes the remaining cells up. So down here is the papillae where we have the blood supply, the nerves, etc. You have the basal cells which are going through mitosis rapidly here, and it's pushing the cells up. But what you see up here is actually dead. Notice on here, I just want to make mention of it, of the erector pili muscle. This muscle is attached to the hair, and when this muscle contracts, what it's going to do is it will pull this hair up this way. So basically now the hair is going to, if I can draw, be straight up and down. So when you have goosebumps, this is what's happening. That muscle contracts and it pulls the hair up. If you're frightened, sometimes you have goosebumps. Why? Because it's a survival mechanism that may sound for humans not to be as important now, but it's still left over. When you get scared or frightened, that muscle contracts, the hair pulls up, it makes you look bigger. If any of you have cats, you're very familiar with this, that when a cat is startled or aggravated or where it's like, stop messing with me and leave me alone, and it's like before it starts to hiss at you, the hair all, you know how it looks, the hair puffs up and it looks so, number one, angry. Yeah, leave it alone. It's a mechanism of protection. You know, it's like, I feel threatened, so make me feel like a lot bigger than everybody else, and then you'll leave me alone. So why do we have hair? Well, it's protection. It helps with thermoregulation. It helps to, basically, it's another layer to keep us warm. It helps with sensory input. You all have had situations where if the hair on your, say, your arm, it gets slightly disturbed, you feel that, and you're like, oh, there's something crawling on me. And as I just mentioned, it's a way of communicating. Leave me alone, protection. Your nails, another accessory structure, is also for protection. The nail root is where the cells are actively dividing just under the skin. You've got the folds on the side and the cuticle that are helping to hold the nail in place. Why does the nail look kind of pinkish, or should in a healthy nail look pinkish? It's because you've got a lot of blood supply right underneath in what's known as the nail bed. So right here is the nail root where the cells are actively growing and pushing out. Nails can tell you a lot about general health. Just FYI, that is one reason why for people undergoing certain types of treatments for certain diseases, they do not want you to put nail polish on so that they can look at the nails. The coloration, etc., can give them clues as to how things are going. Sweat glands are also known as sudoriferous glands. There's two different types. There's the equine sweat glands, which is composed mostly of water. It's for thermoregulation. Most of these are found in the forehead, the palms, the soles of your feet. When water evaporates, it carries heat with it. So when your internal body temperature is going up, you're going to sweat, so that as that sweat evaporates, it helps actually to cool you down. The acorn sweat glands, here the sweat also is water, but it has organic compounds in it. These tend to be found in the armpits and the genital regions, and tend to have a little more of an odor with them. Now the sweat glands, as I mentioned earlier, this is a sweat gland right here. It always has an opening, a free opening on the surface. So you've got this duct work that connects from down here where the gland is, and it goes up this tube or this duct out here to the surface. Sebaceous glands are oil glands. These function for lubrication. They are involved with helping to waterproof the skin and the hair. They're associated with the hair follicles. They do secrete what's known as sebum, which is containing a lot of lipids or fat substances to them, help with that lubrication. And so this is the sebaceous gland here. The oil or lipids are released and secreted into where the hair follicle is. Now, sometimes that can get plugged and then cause its own set of problems. There are a lot of different, what we call sensory receptors that are found in the integument. Now, these are very, very specific. Some will detect light touch, some deep touch. Merkel cells are touch receptors for picking up vibration. That's potassium corpuscles. The Messner corpuscle picks up very light touch. You have some that detect hot temperature, others that detect cold temperature. And so those sensory receptors are going to be very, very specific for what type of thing that they detect, like I say, whether it's pain, whether it's temperature, etc.